Good morning. Thank you for joining the Vegas Chamber Legislative Roundtable. My name is Dylan Keith, Policy Analyst at the Vegas Chamber. Before we get started, I'd like to go over some features of this call. If you're using the desktop or mobile Zoom applications, you may type a question at any time using the question pane at the bottom of the screen. We'll answer as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation. Likewise, you are highly encouraged to ask questions live. Use the hand raise button at the bottom of your screen, and as we open up for questions, we will call your name and unmute your line. Please ensure you're unmuted on your end, and please keep questions brief so we can get to as many as possible. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Vegas Chamber President and CEO, Mayor Beth Sewald.
Thanks a lot, Dylan, and good morning, everybody. Really great to have you all with us today for our legislative roundtable. Before we kick that off, I do have just a couple of announcements I'd like to make. First, I'd like to thank our sponsor of these legislative roundtables. It's Western States Petroleum Association. We're so grateful for your support and continued support of Vegas Chamber programming. Want to highlight just a couple of programs that might be of interest to you. Definitely should be of interest to you. Today, we're having our Paul Call at 11 o'clock. This event is open to all President's Club and advocacy members. In the Paul Call, of course, as you know, if you've ever been in one, you'll hear the latest updates from Carson City, as well as getting an in-depth look at what the Chamber is focusing on in Carson City. And I also want to thank all of our Chamber members who've signed up to be a Chamber advocate. We've had an outpouring of support this legislative session from members who volunteered to be chamber advocates, and it truly is a way for all of us to amplify our voices at the legislature in Carson City. So if you are still interested in joining to be a Chamber advocate at our program, you can visit the Chamber website at vegaschamber.com. Also, we're making a lot of progress in getting our legislators to join us for our April 6th Vegas Chamber's Legislative Day. This signature event is open to all President's Club and advocacy members as well. We're going to go virtual this year because, as everybody knows, the Capitol is closed. But it still is going to be an outstanding opportunity for everybody to hear from leaders in Carson City and to have those invaluable conversations with elected officials and policy makers. And so there's also going to be a link to register on tomorrow's email that we call the rundown. So you want to keep an eye out for that. Another one coming up that you're not going to want to miss is an upcoming webinar focusing on our partners at Hope for Prisoners. That's going to be on March 31st at 10 o'clock in the morning. Hope for Prisoners, for anybody who doesn't know, is it provides people who are formerly incarcerated with long-term support services as they work to reclaim their lives and their families and also their standing in the community. It's an outstanding program that the Vegas Chamber is proud to partner with John Ponder at Hope for Prisoners. And if you're an employer, it'll give you an idea of how you can potentially tap into this workforce and also to get some benefits like tax breaks and payroll assistance. So I encourage you to sign up for that webinar, once again, with Hope for Prisoners on March 31st at 10 o'clock in the morning. All right, so now without any further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our great sponsor today, Argelia Leon. She's the Manager of Strategic Partnerships at Western States Petroleum. Welcome, Argelia.
Thank you, Mary. Good morning, everyone. Well, we first would like to thank the Las Vegas Metro Chamber for allowing us to sponsor this great event. We love to support your efforts and are really appreciative of the partnership and collaboration with you in the state of Nevada. Just a quick overview of what we do. Western States Petroleum Association, we are an industry member-driven association. We represent the oil and gas industry, some of the majors like the Chevrons, P66, Valero, those types of guys. We've got about 12 members in our association. We cover the region of the 5 Western states, which includes Washington, Oregon, California, Nevada, and Arizona. And, you know, our goal is just to continue to support the oil and gas industry, to be there as a committed partner to the communities where we work and serve. So with that, thank you very much, Mary and Paul and team. We appreciate, again, being here today and look forward to continued collaboration with this great organization.
Well, Argelia, thank you again so much for all you do at Western States Petroleum Association. And thank you again for being a sponsor of these great webinars. We really appreciate it.
Happy to do it. Thank you, Mary.
Okay, and now let's get to our panelists. Joining us today is Hugh Anderson. He's the chairman of the Government Affairs Committee for the Vegas Chamber. We also have Paul Moradkhan, the senior vice president of Government Affairs at the Vegas Chamber. And then we also have Jim and Jesse Wadhams. They are partners at Black and Wadhams. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today. All right, very good. Mr. Wadhams, let's get started with you. It's been a while since we all talked on one of these roundtables. Set the table for us. Give us an overview of the environment at the session this year. You're muted, Jim. Sorry. Hate to say that.
I should be able to speak over that mute. I apologize. There's one word to describe this legislative session, and it's COVID. As we all know, all of the people watching this, COVID has affected everything, and it has affected this legislative session, which makes it unique since COVID is a novel coronavirus. This legislature is unique as well. And the legislature is being conducted just like this roundtable. It's being conducted by video. It's being conducted virtually, even though in reality, the legislators are actually making decisions based upon information that they will adopt laws and affect our lives. So it has made it as an extremely difficult challenge for anybody that has an interest in the laws, in the budgets, to be able to get communication into the legislature. This is a difficult process, and I think that really sets the larger problem, and that is making sure that those legislators have the information to make informed decisions, and it's while they are remote. So the process is challenging. The bills are now starting to come out in large numbers, and I'll throw an early recommendation, and I encourage all your members to become chamber advocates, because that's going to be the key to input in this legislative session. Thank you, Mary Beth.
Well, thank you, Jim. And yeah, it's been difficult. I've testified, I know you all have, and whether you're on the phone or on video, it's a challenge, and we're certainly not able to see folks in person. But Hugh Anderson, I'll go to you now. What's some of the feedback as chairman of the Government Affairs Committee? What's some of the feedback that you're getting from your fellow members about this legislative session, especially in light of what Jim Wadhams just said?
Well, I think it echoes what Jim just said. There's a very grave concern about we're not getting adequately heard with our concerns about the bills that are being put in front of our representatives. And of course, where we are at this point in the session, the sheer volume is extraordinary that our team needs to deal with. And so our members are telling us that, number one, we understand that the feedback or the business case, of course, is always uppermost of their concern, but then there are other issues that they're hearing about and not getting enough information in their minds to truly make sure that our legislators are making the right decisions. And it's on election security, it's on education, it's on the healthcare system, it's on all the things that we're having a reaction to the pandemic, rightly so, because it has changed a lot of what has affected our state very severely, especially in Southern Nevada. But our members want to understand that the ways of educating our legislators on the unintended consequences of well-intentioned bill drafts are thoroughly vetted before that becomes law and does negatively affect us.
And obviously, I mean, you make a great point, Hugh. Obviously, that's a lot more challenging when we're trying to run the session this way virtually and so forth. And so now I'll open this up to any of you, Jesse or Paul or Jim and Hugh as well. Now that legislative staff are being vaccinated and so forth, do you anticipate the legislature opening back up anytime soon?
Let me jump into that because my mic is not muted. That just follows on the point, the COVID, and I hope everybody understands what we have already said, but it's really critical, and your question tees it up perfectly. The legislative building where the legislators are making these decisions is not open to the public. Nobody can go inside that building except the legislators and the staff. And that's why the question about vaccination is important. We believe that as more vaccinations occur and the staff and the legislators get vaccinated, that they will begin to open up the building so people can access directly to the legislators as they're making these decisions. We think that probably sometime, perhaps mid-April, that could begin to occur. But even when it does, it will not be fully open. It will be still with restricted times and restricted numbers. But it just emphasizes that we're still going to have to rely upon these virtual types of communications, emails, texts, and actually old-fashioned snail mail.
And Jim, just to clarify, as I understand it, they are allowing some limited media in the building. Is that the case or no?
It's correct. I think the correct term, and Mary Beth, correct me if I use it wrong, it's a pooled media. And so there's probably a half a dozen, maybe to 10 representatives of the media, and they share among whatever distribution systems there are, but that's fairly limited as well. But the media is inside. The problem for us at the chamber and all of our members is the media is reporting what they're doing. They're not providing input or even actually evaluating whether the legislators are making those thoughtful decisions that Hugh has referenced. What information are they relying upon? And the prime challenge for us is the recovery, getting the economy back moving, getting our employees rehired. And that's why information to the legislators about the consequences is so critically important, Mary Beth.
Yeah, no, I understand and I hear you. And that is important. And Mitch Fox from the Broadcasters Association just chimed in and he said there are 15 broadcasters and 15 print in the building. But to your point, Jim, they're reporting out what is going on. There's no way for two-way communication in person there. So, and that just exacerbates, because we've got, as you've already pointed out, we're going to get to Paul next to tell us about some of the bills that are coming out in Carson City. These could potentially be landmark bills, and they also could have a potentially devastating effect on business across the state. So Paul, with that, what bills do you expect? What's going on right now? Give us a highlight and overview of what you're saying in Carson.
No, sure. And good morning, everyone. To Mary Beth's point, this past week, we had an introduction bill deadline that was set for Monday. But the legislator have extended that to next Monday. So that gives them more time to have bills introduced for hearings and consideration. Some of the bills we just dealt with yesterday were employer related. One was a whistleblower bill, AB 222. We also dealt with a wage history / pay equity bill, which was AB 124, both brought on the assembly side. And the issue we're seeing in Mary Beth, and as you know this, of course, and our team does, is that we're seeing multiple bills dropping right now that do impact Nevada's business climate. It will restrict how we bring folks back. It will hinder our job creation and redevelopment for the state as we move forward from the COVID-19 impact. And the bigger concern is it's not just one bill, it's the fact there's 40 or 50 bills right now that we're trying to fix that impact the members, from sick leave, from paid time off, to business liability, to right to repair. I mean, it's a pretty extensive list that's growing every day as we see more bills coming out between now and Monday. So it is a concerning trend we're seeing.
And if I might just jump in, Mary Beth, I think the critical component of that is the underlying theme of these bills. So each bill has its own particular target to ostensibly remedy. But the reality is the underlying theme is a blatant misunderstanding of what it takes to run a business and grow a business, and how important the flexibility to hire when the business conditions are right. And some of these bills are going to impede a willful employer who wants to hire, but is going to second guess the hiring decision, because it's probably one of the most expensive decisions an employer makes.
Oh yeah, no, you make a great point, and it's more challenging and more important than ever that our members and our advocates are able to educate the legislators on what these bills and the unintended consequences could be. So that communication is more important now than ever. Jesse, can you give us an update? I know that there are some bills coming out as it relates to insurance and healthcare. Speaking of expensive.
Yeah, thanks, Mary Beth, and good morning to everyone. I think in the healthcare and the insurance side, you are certainly seeing bills that look at how insurance contracts work, how representations and warranties of an individual get processed and looked at. Things like disclosure of policy limits is a favorite of the trial bar to look at, because that's a way that they can sort of look at what a person's insurance coverage looks like prior to filing a lawsuit. So we've seen that kind of bill. And in healthcare, you're seeing lots of new, a lot of well-intended bills, things that will say, oh, let's have Medicaid cover these kinds of services, particularly pregnancies, particularly with doula services, a lot of maternal care. I think great underlying policies that say great things about where you want coverage to be. That said, we don't really pay for them. They're not, there's no actual payment mechanism built in. And as folks know, in the special session, we cut Medicaid reimbursement to providers by 6%, the largest in the nation. So there's these kind of, I don't know, for lack of a better word, this kind of weird dichotomy that sets up in some of the bills. And I do want to kind of come back, because in the insurance space, it bleeds over to what Paul was talking about, with all kinds of new rights of action that will be levied against employers or businesses generally. So I think that's kind of where we're seeing so far.
So Jesse, while we're talking with you, can you give us an update on the status of AB 47? That's the Attorney General's non-compete merger, acquisition, and healthcare bill. And I know I just mentioned Mitch Fox a minute ago from the Broadcasters Association. I know this is something that's on their radar too.
Yeah, so that bill had its first hearing. Again, AB 47, as you described it, is an Attorney General's bill that looks at mergers, acquisitions, looks at non-competes, and looks at the healthcare industry. What has generally happened is that bill has scaled back the non-competes, to kind of start with the broadest look. The non-competes have been restored for use by employers, and there's sort of now going to be a bright, if the bill gets processed, assuming, there would be now a bright line rule that says if an employer uses non-competes, it can't be for an hourly employee. And so I think that's at least a compromise that has been sort of swirling about for a bit. With regard to the mergers and acquisitions and the healthcare piece, that has really shifted in the bill. There's no longer a broad look at all mergers and acquisitions. Now it is very much targeted at healthcare contracts and healthcare arrangements, such that the Attorney General will basically look at any agreement that in certain counties, say in Washoe, it would be a provider group of 2 would have to report all kinds of contracts into the Attorney General's. In Clark County, it would be provider groups of 7. Again, these are pretty small looks. So the bill is moving in a decent direction, I guess, overall, as relative to the broader business community. The healthcare industry still has some concerns about that level of burden and reporting. So generally favorable. The macro look, targeted a little more troubling.
Yeah, okay. I know that you guys have all put in a lot of work to try to make those improvements, so thank you for all that. I also want to remind everybody, please do chime in and ask your questions, whether it's over chat or we'd love to hear your voice as well. So I want to encourage everybody to ask your questions, because this is your time and you have the leading experts across the state here on this webinar today. Speaking of leading experts, Mr. Wadhams, let's go back to you. The other day, on Monday, as a matter of fact, we saw the legislature extend the bill introduction deadline by another week. What does this mean to the whole process? And do you think that they'll extend legislative deadlines around this?
Well, they clearly extended this one. And I think part of the reason, again, is what I said at the top of the show. COVID. COVID has slowed down the drafting of bills in the first place. And in fairness, I think they didn't get them prepared in time to be introduced by the original deadline. And so that's been extended. Now, the question that you ask really is, will they extend other deadlines through the legislative session? I suspect not. And the reason is because they only have 120 total days, which I think is about 71 days left in this legislative session. So if they push too much to the end, then they won't have time to get everything done. So I think that other deadlines will not be extended. Right now, what the issue is getting the bills out so they can begin to look at them. As everybody knows, there's horse trading that goes on as these bills are evaluated and thinned out. There will be some that will fall by the wayside, but it makes it important for us to be monitoring it. And I apologize, I just got to flip back to something that Jesse just put on the table. Oftentimes we in business think about, are they going to raise my taxes? Which is a question may come up later, but these costs of doing business that come in the bills like Jesse has just identified really are the equivalent of hidden taxes. They increase the cost of doing business. And as every business person knows, that's what you use before you decide whether you can afford to hire another employee or rehire that employee who's been sitting on the sidelines. And so this becomes a critical aspect of trying to encourage the recovery.
Mary Beth, if I can just chime in from a practical standpoint, some of my most enlightened employers, when they sit down with their employees every year, they don't just show them their annual wage, they show them the cost of their employment, whether it's the Social Security match and all the other regulatory burdens that go on. So a $50,000 employee, that's their earned income, can cost an employer $80,000 to $100,000 to have. So it goes back to my point before that as they pile up the regulatory burden on our employers, they think twice about rehiring. They have to. You're on mute.
Yeah, I saw that. I just couldn't get it turned off fast enough. Yeah, definitely. The cost of doing business. I mean, we look at that even, at the chamber, anytime we have to hire a full-time employee, it's not just the salary that goes into that. So anytime we pile on these extra costs, it becomes onerous, definitely. And which affects the entire labor pool. So I want to get to a question that just came up in the chat a second ago. It's off some of these other topics, but it is a good question. Any update on the daylight savings time bill from anybody?
So Mary Beth, I saw Mitch's question and I wanted to take a quick look at that. It has been introduced. There is a bill from Senator Hardy to basically, if say California and other Western states decide to shift off of the time shift, Nevada would follow along. But again, this all has to go to Congress because Congress controls the time for the time zones. And so I think it's interesting because the state passed the resolution to ask Congress to do this in 2015 and it didn't get done. So it's always one that I think it just requires a coordinated push. So.
Okay, thanks, Jesse. Appreciate that. Paul, you know that the Vegas Chamber, we convene the state associations and chambers and things quite often. And you've done a great job of working with everybody and coordinating all of our efforts so that we do have a unified voice. Tell us a little bit about what's the general sentiment from the other business associations across the state and chambers about how the session is going for them.
No, absolutely, Mary Beth, and that's, I think, a great question. I think for our members to know that the business community, as you indicated, is united. We convene everybody at least once a week. It's a chamber, it's different trade associations, other chambers throughout the state. And I think that the fact that we're working together is giving me a reassurance to the trade partners that we will collaborate and try to find as many solutions as possible to the bills. I know there is, of course, and Jim has touched on this a few times, the building is closed. So there is some frustration about access, how to communicate, how to get hold of legislators. But there is a growing trend amongst the trade partners and other chambers that the bills that are coming out are great concern to the chamber. As you indicate, every bill that has a mandate, a private right of action, a class action lawsuit piece to it, shifting the liability onto employers, that is a growing concern we're hearing not just within our organization, but from our trade partners and their specific industry groups. So that theme is definitely increasing as we see more bills coming out this week and by next Monday. And when you have 40, 50 bills in opposition from the business community and from the chamber, it's a lot to process and a lot to fix. So there is a concern.
I know we've had a lot of concerns. There have been a couple of bills that the chamber has been in favor of. SB 173, the Back on Track Act. I testified in favor of that yesterday. That would give federal funding to schools for summer school. Have you heard any? Is there traction? How's that going?
No, I think you're right. You testified on the bill yesterday. It was a major piece of legislation coming from the Senate Democrat caucus. Something, as you indicated, we supported. And that dollars will be funded through the American Rescue Plan. And that plan actually from the federal government really encouraged states to use about 12.5% to help school districts. And the fact that they recognize that online or digital learning is not the same as in-person, and you have to give high school students an opportunity to make up on credits and make sure elementary and junior high kids don't fall behind math and science. I think that's good for the business community, because at the end of the day, our members will hire those students that graduate or go on to college. So I think that's a good use of federal dollars to help our students in this and the disparity they're facing with education learning.
Another one that I think will be good for businesses is AB 184, and we also testified in favor of that one. That creates the Small Business Advocacy Office. Tell us a little bit about what that is and why everybody listening today should know about it.
Absolutely. And as you just indicated, creates a small business advocate office in the lieutenant governor's portfolio. And Mary Beth, as you said during your hearing the other day, we constantly get inquiries from members about how to streamline an issue with the state agency or local government. So this bill will create a one-stop shop that will provide resources, guidance, inquiries to other agencies to help streamline, expedite requests. Of course, they won't engage on legal matters because they can as a state office, but they will provide more resources than before we've had for our members in a one-stop approach, which will be helpful, I think, for a lot of folks as they look for resources and guidance during COVID-19 recovery.
Well, and speaking of a lot of resources, Hugh Anderson, I know you're chairing, in addition to the Government Affairs Committee, you're also chairing a workforce task force, which will also create a lot of resources for our businesses, in addition to the Small Business Advocacy Office. Take a second and tell us about what the status is of that task force.
Thank you, Mary Beth. The moniker it's been given is the Southern Nevada Workforce Solutions portal, essentially, and it's going to be phone-based predominantly, but it's also going to be online. And basically what this committee did for the last better part of a year is an asset map all of the resources available to displaced workers. Now, the intent was not to find these folks a job. The intent was to enlighten them to better financial security with more the better career paths that were highlighted in Blueprint 2.0 that the Chamber and the LVGEA and Workforce Connections published a couple of years ago, and help these folks not self-select out that I don't qualify, I don't have the money, I don't have the education. As we all know, many, many employers now do not require four-year education. They require certifications. And many of these certifications only require 8, 12, 15, 20 weeks. And they are very, very cost effective. There is money to support these folks. And so we want to make sure that it's as easy as possible. And my grand vision ultimately is that it's going to be as easy as using Netflix, where someone who is frustrated, and even if they get back to work in their prior job, which for many of these folks is not entirely likely, especially in the short term, no matter how busy the town gets, most employers are going to be reticent to go back to full complement very quickly. We want to make sure that that person knows that there are opportunities for them to reposition themselves for the economy that we hope we have going forward, not the economy we've had in the past.
Well, Hugh, thanks for all your work on that. I know you've come an awful long way since you started in the middle of the pandemic, so we really appreciate all your work around that. Thank you. We also know that Nevada is slated to receive $3.9 billion from the federal government. So Hugh, Jesse, Jim, anybody who wants to chime in on this one, how's that going to impact the conversation about the need for additional revenue this legislative session?
Well, I guess I'll start and then let the more experienced hands kind of take the macro, the extended historical look. That level of funding, I mean, that's a very, very large number comparative to our general fund budget. Almost half. I think goes to the state. And so, somewhere in the neighborhood of $3 billion, $4 billion. What is clear is that the pressure, that sort of idea that we must raise revenue to fund programs, that level of pressure has been removed, but there is still at least a swirling level of conversation about things that we need to create new revenue streams that are sustainable over the longer term, but the details of any of those discussions seem to have kind of fallen by the wayside at the moment. It is interesting because I think that federal funding kind of plays into the Medicaid components where we've put all the may put all these new services into Medicaid. Will we be able to fund them, and will we be able to pay providers to give to provide them over the long term? And I think Jim or Hugh may have a different, more perspective.
Let me jump in, Mary Beth. I think Jesse set a great stage, and we're hearing depending on the groups we're here then that are in the chatter sphere, we're hearing a couple of different themes. Some say this money will put us back on an even plane and allow us to recover without the dramatic cuts that happened during the special session. And that's certainly one perspective that's being discussed. The second one that's being discussed is, oh no, this just fills the hole and takes us from disaster level government services back to inadequate level of government services. And of course we need to find more revenue on top of the federal funds, because that just simply fills a hole. And that sort of a dichotomy, if you will, is really the issue that the legislature has to think about. What will they use this money for? Is it going to be for infrastructure development? Are they going to put it away in a rainy day fund? Will they put it into effectively a trust account and use the income going forward and preserve the assets? Those are the questions that are going to drive whether additional revenue is going to be looked at. That the discussion of additional revenue is absolutely on the table. Absolutely on the table.
Mary Beth, if I might just jump in one other point, I think it's imperative that we recognize that there's also the opportunity to have Nevada start acting like the middle-sized state that it is. And so will this money be used to create the environment where we are accommodating the sheer population size that we have and the continued growth that we have? So will there be a focus on upgrading systems and procedures and processes and departments properly so we can go forward with a full head of steam and instead of having the excuses, oh, sorry, we don't have enough computing power, or it's 25 years old and things like that. So it's about making solid, sound investments in people and personnel and capital expenditures, quite frankly. And of course, results, accountability, transparency, and results like we all demand of our businesses.
Mary Beth, if I could just jump in for a second on that. I think Jim and Jesse and Hugh laid it out really well, but that $3.9 billion is one-time funding. So that part of the conversation that's going to have to be had is, where will those dollars go? Because obviously an infusion type of dollars, it's not sustainable for the state to come with another $4 billion 2 years from now. So it'll be interesting to see where they put those dollars in the next few months as we move forward through the session.
Well, what's the timing of those decisions, and what's that process going to be?
No, that's a great question. So the U.S. Treasury has to release guidelines they've done with other stimulus packages. And every time the guidelines have been different, how those dollars can be spent and how the state can allocate those funds to what programs. So that is happening now. So we anticipate they'll start releasing funds in the next several months. Obviously, conversations are occurring with the governor's office and legislative leadership. A good example is the school district bill that you just referred to earlier, Mary Beth. There's a commitment to use some of those rescue dollars to fund summer school statewide. And we have, of course, asked if more dollars are available for the PETS grants program in the state. That's something the chamber would like to see for small business relief, of course, because there's a greater demand and there was available even in the last round of $50 million.
Mary Beth?
Go ahead, Jim.
I think Paul and Hugh have really set an important observation that we have to look at for the legislature, particularly those of us in Southern Nevada. We're used to seeing major events be quickly and efficiently populated with reservations. For example, the Electric Daisy shows that occur at our major pavilions and venues. And yet we have a DETR, a state unemployment insurance system that, as I understand, still has not been able to catch up because of their computer ancient history. And for those of us in the business community, we can't quite figure out why a city and a county and a state that can, on the private side, operate so efficiently, we fall so far behind. Vaccine program was another one. The early days, it was almost impossible to get an appointment. And I think hopefully some of this money is spent to bring the state, the governmental structure, the infrastructure to a level that it can better serve the public. That kind of efficiency, I think, benefits all.
All right, very good, gentlemen. Does anybody have anything else to add before we wrap up? Not seeing any other questions. Jesse?
Well, the only thing I'd add on what I think Jim, Paul, and Hugh have now said about that federal money is what I have heard, and probably others. Because the federal government guidance is still pending, and we have 74 days, 15 hours left of this legislative session, we're probably looking at a special session to actually understand what that, how that money might get spent. One of the prevalent rumors is that we will simply pass the governor's recommended budget in this next 75 days, and then wait for the funding and come back to address any follow-up. So look for a session in probably July-ish, and then clearly one in October, November for the redistricting. So could be a long year for us.
You're not counting the minutes or anything, are you, Jesse?
Down to the seconds.
Loves that countdown clock, just to let everybody know.
And Mary Beth, if I can just chime in with one last point to reiterate where you opened the program with, to pound the table. Chamber advocacy participants are vital, especially in this session, to help Jim, Jesse, and Paul and the rest of the team support the chamber focus and the issues that we need to raise. They are the known quantities. The legislators know these folks, they know their expertise, they have great visibility, but nothing is more powerful than one of our members reaching out to their legislator and saying, this is what this bill is going to do to me, for me, or hurt me. And that resonates. So please, advocates, be active and be ready for the calls to action. And those who haven't signed up, please do that, because it's going to be vital, not only in this session, but going forward.
It is, Hugh. Thanks for bringing that up again. And to add on to that, you know, at the Vegas Chamber, we can help individuals if you want to do a video, or we can help with social media, help you craft the message. It's not hard and it doesn't take much time, but it does make an enormous impact. So thank you, Hugh, for pounding the table again on that. So I just want to thank all of you guys for your service to the state of Nevada, to the chamber, and to all of our members and non-members alike across this state, because what you're doing is invaluable. And this is an historic time, and we've never had to go through a session quite like this. The special sessions, okay, were a little bit of a primer, but this has been a challenge. So you all are doing amazing work, and I just want to thank you again. I also want to thank Argelia Leon, the manager of strategic partnerships at Western States Petroleum Association. Thank you, Argelia, for sponsoring these webinars. As you can see, they're incredibly vital to communicating with our members. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you all. Appreciate the conversation today.
All right. Once again, thank you to Hugh Anderson, Paul Moradkhan, and Jim and Jesse Wadhams for all your service and partnership at the Vegas Chamber. We appreciate that. We'll talk to you all again very soon, and I hope everybody has a great day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Everybody.